For some people, there is something quite comforting about being the person who helps. You know what I mean? Someone comes to you with a problem and you listen. Perhaps you offer thoughts, maybe help them work through what they might do next. And then you check in with them afterwards because you genuinely care about what happens to them. And there is nothing wrong with any of that. In fact, someone who listens, supports, and cares about other people is a wonderful person to have in your life. But there is a point at which something can quietly change. You're no longer simply caring about someone else is going through, you're starting to feel responsible for it in some way. And their problem occupies your thoughts. You find yourself wondering what they're going to do. You think about the solutions that they haven't even thought of, and you worry about the consequences of their decisions. Perhaps you even find yourself trying to influence what happens next. And sometimes you may not notice that you've crossed a line that isn't even always obvious. You simply know that you can't quite let it go. This isn't about whether you should care less, of course not. But it is worth considering whether you can care without taking responsibility for things that aren't yours to manage. Because there's a difference. You can care deeply about someone and still recognize that their feelings, their decisions, and their mistakes, and the consequences of those all belong to them. And it is their journey and their own to travel. And this doesn't mean that you have to become distant or uncaring. It doesn't mean you stop listening or offering support. And it certainly doesn't mean you become the sort of person that goes, well, that's your problem, and walks away. This is about something much more subtle. It means recognizing where your responsibility starts and ends. And for some people, that can be surprisingly difficult. If you become accustomed to being the person who helps fixes, smooths things over, stepping back can initially feel uncomfortable, and you might find yourself thinking, but if I don't do it, who will? What if they make the wrong decision? Or even, what sort of person would I be if I just stood back and let them deal with it? Those questions can tell us something important. Sometimes the discomfort we feel when we stop taking responsibility for other people isn't evidence that we're doing something wrong. It's the discomfort of doing something differently. So if you've become accustomed to being that person that steps in when someone is struggling to help them find a solution or making sure things turn out all right, stepping back can feel strangely unfamiliar. There is a difference between fixing and recognizing that another person is an adult with a life of their own. And we sometimes forget how much dignity there is in allowing people to have their own experience. Other people are allowed to make choices that we wouldn't make, to have feelings that we don't always understand. They're allowed to make mistakes and find their own answers. And sometimes our desire to help can actually get in the way of that. Not because our intentions are bad, far from it. And it's actually the opposite. We may want to spare someone the pain of getting something wrong or prevent them from making a decision that we think they'll regret. We may be able to see a situation clearly, but it doesn't mean it's ours to solve. There's a kind of wisdom in being able to say, I can see this is difficult for you, and I'm here if you need me, without immediately adding, and I'll work it all out and make it lots better for you. These are very different positions. One says, I am with you. The other can quietly become, I'm responsible for you. Perhaps that distinction is worth thinking about in your own relationships. When someone comes to us with a problem, what if we paused before immediately moving into solution mode? It might be useful to consider, have they actually asked me to solve this? Or do they need someone to listen? We can offer an opinion without needing the other person to embrace it. We can say, I think this might be worth taking into account, and then allow the decision to remain theirs. And what if we realise that they made a choice that we wouldn't have made and we still remain alongside them? That's a difficult one. Because caring about someone means that sometimes we care about the outcome too. We may genuinely believe that they are making the wrong decision. We may be frightened for them. We may want to protect them from something we think is coming. But caring doesn't give us ownership of another person's life. Sometimes the most respectful thing we can do is allow someone to make their own choices while letting them know that we care. So this is not abandonment or indifference, and it's certainly not failing to help. It is recognizing that supporting someone and taking responsibility for them and the outcome are not the same thing. Perhaps this is where the idea of emotional wisdom comes in. Emotional wisdom isn't about becoming detached from other people, and it isn't about putting up walls or refusing to be affected by people we love. What it is about is developing enough awareness to know what's ours and what isn't. I can care about your sadness without making it my sadness. I can listen to your worries without carrying them round afterwards. And I can offer my ideas without needing you to follow them. I can be there for you without believing it's my job to make everything right for you. And I can love you while allowing you to choose your own direction. And that last part may be the hardest of all. Because sometimes we take responsibility for other people's issues precisely because we love them. But love doesn't require us to carry someone. Maybe we can choose to walk beside them. When you carry someone, you take their weight. When you walk beside them, you're present. You can offer your hand. You can listen. You can help when needed. But they're still walking their own path. And perhaps that's a more generous way of being with the people we care about, because it allows them to remain in control of their own lives and responsible for their own lives, while allowing us to remain responsible for ours. And it also gives something back to us, because if we stop spending so much energy thinking about what other people should, could, or might do, we have more attention available for our own lives, our choices, our relationships, our thoughts, and our feelings. We don't have to become less caring or compassionate. But what I am suggesting is that we become a little more discerning about where our responsibility begins and ends. So perhaps the next time someone brings you a problem, you don't need to immediately ask, how can I fix this? You might choose to listen and then perhaps ask what they need from you. You might offer an insight or an idea. And then when the conversation is over, you remind yourself, this matters to me, but it belongs to them. Because caring and carrying are not quite the same thing. You can walk beside someone without walking their path for them. Perhaps that's the freedom in knowing what's yours and what isn't.